Welcome to Portland Press Herald Audio. This is a recording of the Maine Cannabis Report live event held May 23rd at Port City Music Hall. The topic today is Ready for Recreational. The guests include Scott Durst, the founder of Durst Security Group, specializing in cannabis business security in Maine, Thomas Mourmouras, managing partner of Fiscal Therapy Financial, a marijuana-focused business consulting firm, Erik Peters, the chief operating officer of GHM Insurance in Waterville, and Jacques Santucci, the principal of Nucleus One, a consulting firm specializing in performance and management in the cannabis industry. Santucci is also a co-founder of Wellness Connection of Maine, a medical dispensary with 4 locations. The moderator today is Portland Press Herald reporter Penelope Overton.
Hi, I'd like to welcome everybody here to the Maine Cannabis Report's second live forum. So we are still kind of feeling our way along here. We're really big on winging it. At the end of all of this, we're going to send out surveys. You guys can let us know what we could be doing better, what you might like to know about in the future. We're planning out one for the fall. We're still looking for topics. The election seems to be a really likely subject, but we're open to other topics as well. And now I'm going to make just a little bit of an opening statement. Just from covering marijuana, I'm going to lead off with this, which is that cannabis is one of those topics that inspires a lot of passion. To some, it's a life-saving medicine. To others, it's their life's work. Some see it as dangerous. Others see it as a potential cash cow. And of course, it's still illegal under federal law. However, this forum right here is not intended to rehash most of that. We're not about whether adult use cannabis is good or bad, whether it should be legal, or whether the law that was just adopted is the best or worst thing since sliced bread. If you want to have a say on that, please find me afterwards. We'll probably still keep writing about that one for a long time. But this one right here is supposed to be about talking about how Mainers who want to start to get ready to apply for an adult use business license can do so. Whether you want to run a boutique grow operation, whether you want to manufacture cannabis-infused products, open a retail store, it kind of runs the gamut. You can do a nursery. That's a little known part of the whole licensing process that's still being fleshed out. But if all goes according to plan, like Carol said, you've got about a year to get your ducks in a row. And our panelists, who each hail from a very different marijuana subspecialty, are going to share their thoughts about what to do next and how to prepare for the licensing stage. Also a little bit about how you want to start thinking about lining up your business even before you get a license, whether it be the conditional state license or the municipal license that you will need. And here's how this is going to work here tonight. I'm going to remind you first a little bit about what's in our new recreational marijuana law. It's going to be quick. That will be your last opportunity to get a drink or hit the bathroom. It's like 15 slides. I'm going to pop through them pretty fast because you guys either really know it or you're going to need to hire a lawyer in the future so that you can really know it before you get into business. But it's just so that you can put what they say into context. Then I'm going to ask a few questions. They're really just starters. These guys all know their stuff. They're going to kind of play off each other a little bit. What Scott says is probably going to spark something in Tom's head. He's going to jump in. Jacques, Erik, everybody's going to just kind of sit around like they're at a dinner table or a bar and talk a little bit about this. And then about 6 o'clock, maybe a little bit after that, we'll open it up to Q&A. There's a microphone right up here up front. We don't have one of the handheld mics that we can pass around this time, so if you have a question, please line up. I'll make a couple of requests when we come down to the Q&A time about making them questions as opposed to comments and keeping them to one so that the person behind you has a chance. And then we will wrap up the official stuff no later than about 6:30, and you guys can mingle, laugh at what we might have said, and have a nice night. So I am going to introduce the panelists. To my left, we have Scott Durst. Scott is the owner of Durst Security Group, which he founded 5 years ago. The last 4 of those years has been spent focusing on the cannabis industry, especially the transportation of both currency and cannabis here in Maine, as well as other parts of the country. The firm is staffed by retired and former law enforcement and military veterans, many with extensive security experience here and overseas. The firm also trains their clients' staff and provides tracking options for both personnel and product. Scott himself has more than 32 years in law enforcement here in Maine, including 10 years with the Portland Police Department and 22 years as an agent with the Maine Drug Enforcement Agency. And to the left of him, Tom gave me a little special right up here, is Tom Mourmouras, who is the managing partner of Fiscal Therapy Financial. It's a tax and business consulting firm specializing in the cannabis industry here in Maine. After graduating from Cheverus High School in Portland, he attended the Johns Hopkins University, where he earned his degree in materials science engineering with a minor in business in 2014. He then saw an opportunity to come back to Maine with the knowledge he had acquired at school and began working with his dad in the emerging medical marijuana market. Tom and his father now offer guidance to over 220 medical marijuana businesses in Maine, with a sizable portion of them preparing for a move to the adult use market. To his left is Erik Peters. Erik is the Chief Operating Officer of GHM Insurance. That's a full-service insurance and risk management agency located in Waterville. GHM insures a growing number of caregivers and growers and is also a supporter of the medical marijuana caregivers of Maine. GHM has been in business since 1901 and has worked in the field of marijuana insurance since medical marijuana became legal in Maine. Erik joined GHM in January 2018. Prior to that, he worked as a lawyer practicing personal injury and employment law in Portland. And then last, but not least, Jacques Santucci, who is the principal of Nucleus One, a business performance and management consulting firm specializing in the cannabis industry. His team helps clients from New England to Hawaii grow their business, focusing on setting up the structure, funding, operations, and administration of the business, overseeing construction of the facilities and systems, as well as creating strong relationships with financing partners and major vendors. In addition to creating Nucleus One, Jacques is a co-founder of Wellness Connection of Maine, one of New England's largest group of medical marijuana dispensaries. He is also the founder of Streamo? Yeah, that. A software company that offers an integrated software system for the cannabis industry with a seed-to-sale tracking system integrated with costing and accounting modules. And I might also say that these guys have all been really helpful for me trying to learn a lot about the industry. So we're here holding this particular panel because of LD 1650. And just in case people out there haven't been following what's been happening in Augusta, here's a brief, hopefully 3-minute refresher on what the new adult use law allows and what it doesn't. And this is the legal disclaimer. It's a 40-page bill. I'm a reporter, not a lawyer. So this is just the way I would write it for the paper. So we have, So here are some of the general licensing gotta do's. You've got to be 21 years old. You have to be a Maine resident. That's defined as having 4 years of Maine income tax filings on record at the time of application, which, as it was brought up this morning at another symposium I was at, really means you have to be a 5-year resident, pretty much. Also important is that 51% at least of your money that's funding the operation must be Maine source. So you can get outside cash, but only up to 49%. And let's see, and then of course the no disqualifying felony drug charges for the last 10 years. Now here are the 5 license categories that the MLI committee got into the bill. Nursery, which really has been kind of pretty vague. That'll be fleshed out mostly in rulemaking. Cultivation, manufacturing, retail, and testing. Generally for the grow license, there is no statewide cap, and you can commingle medical and adult use marijuana growing if you are a licensed caregiver as well as the adult use license. If you tag each individual, adult use or medical grow as such, and if they're kept separate in the facility. You've got 4 tiers. That first tier was a really big one for a lot of the small caregivers. It was a big win, which is up to 30 mature plants or 500 square feet of canopy. Canopy is defined as flowering plants. Tier 2 is up to 2,000 square feet, 3 up to 7,000, and 4 up to 20,000 square feet. And here's what you pay to do that. The tier 1, which is the boutique level, is you can do it basically by plant or by square feet of canopy. You can see these are pretty low actual both fees, application fees and license fees, especially when you compare them with other places in the country. I can read through these, but you can probably also read them. Each one from tier 2 to tier 4 has a $500 application fee. That's just to get your foot in the door. You fill out your application, you get your state conditional license, and then you go back to your municipality, which is a whole different, requirement. If you get that, there will be separate application fees for the local municipality. Then you can come back and get your license, and that's where the big investment comes. Tier 2, it's $1,500 to $3,000, depending if you're indoor or outdoor. Outdoor, it's going to be the lower figure. Tier 3 is $5,000 to $10,000 to get that license. Tier 4 is $15,000 to $30,000. I would never be able to afford any of those, but when you look at the rest of the country and the legalized states, those are actually pretty low. And let's see. However, you can also, that's not your limit, you can grow. If you start off in one of the lower tiers, if you can prove that you've sold 85% of your inventory, you can then bump up to the next tier. The maximum one, you can also, it has to be every 2 years. If you sell 85% of your product, if you're under the maximum tier, you can then add another 7,000 square feet. The maximum that you can have is 30,000 square feet total. You can break those up into some individual licenses, and every individual license holder or investor can have up to 3 grows. Eventually, that number will bump up. I think. And actually, I don't want to say the date because I might have that wrong, but you've got a couple of years where you're going to have a 3 license limit. And then for manufacturing, here we get into the extraction and the edibles, the tinctures, that kind of thing. Any extraction using hazardous material must get extra state certification, which basically you're talking about an engineer's okay, both that the equipment that you're using is being used according to manufacturer's recommendations, that the facility it's in is okay, and that if you're making your own, that he's able to actually certify that you know what you're doing. And I've heard figures on that, testimony in Augusta, that ranges from like a couple of $1,000s. One caregiver said that he'd gotten quotes for up to $20,000. I have been hearing about 10. So you can commingle both adult use and recreational under a manufacturing license, if you have both licenses. So you've got to be that caregiver as well, or a dispensary, as well as having that adult use license. And this doesn't apply if you're a tincture maker, but if you are the edible maker, you've got to have a commercial kitchen license as well. So you're talking about, you've got an idea of the kinds of fees and requirements that are starting to add up here. For retail licenses, there is no statewide license limit. There could be as many as local municipalities will approve. Individuals are limited to 4 licenses through 2022. There is no mingling of medical and adult use at a retail store. During the testimony, they were talking about you could have a single facility with 2 doors and 2 entrances, but that's probably going to be worked out in detail under the regulation writing. No drive-throughs, no online buying, no delivery, home delivery, and probably also pretty important is that here caregivers have that ability to kind of get a run on things, caregivers and dispensaries, because they can buy products from themselves, medical product, and have it on the shelf day one that you have your adult use license. That means you won't have that wait period for the first grow. As Carol said, DAFS is the sole regulatory agency now in charge of this. They'll consult with a bunch of different agencies, which might be the nice way to slow things down. But at this point, DAFS is going to be who you want to get to know. DAFS is also going to have control of the medical marijuana industry as well. Taxes, an effective 20% tax rate. That will mean a 10% retail tax and then a per weight excise tax. And so excise tax is almost a little bit beyond me. So I've got a slide that will be a breakdown on exactly what that means. Like you'll see $335 a pound for mature flowering plants, $94 a pound for trim. This is all stuff that is going to be paid when the wholesale grow operation that's not vertically integrated then sells to a retail store. So the consumer will probably get that passed along to them. However, they won't see it. They're going to go to the store and say, oh, look, I pay a 10% sales tax. But built into that, most likely, at least in the beginning, is going to be that cost of the wholesale tax. Over time, the price of marijuana may drop to the point where growers have to eat a little bit of that. That's happened in other states, but not at least in the beginning, probably here in Maine. And here we have probably the trickiest thing that you will have to maneuver in all of this. Because I think that most of the state licensing is going to be checking boxes, but here you're going to have this local requirement. You need to have your municipality that you want to locate, whatever it might be, a lab, a nursery, whatever. You need to have them approve it. And that is not an opt-out kind of thing. The first bill that got vetoed and killed would have basically meant that a town would have had to have taken steps to prevent you by like doing a moratorium or a prohibition. But now, unless a town specifically approves either zoning or a warrant article, something like that, whatever their local government, form of government allows, to allow a marijuana business, you're out of luck. So you want to get to know the people in your communities and know whether the one that you want to locate in, you want to know that they're going to be on board with it. You do not need to say when you're conditional, your first application to the state, where it is that you want to actually build. You can get that license, that conditional license first, then go to the locality, local municipality and get your approval there. So you could have, like if the first one fails, you could go to a second or a third, but you want to have that lined up first. And let's see. Oh, and I'm going to go back one more thing. Towns can ban some or all marijuana businesses. They can limit their number, so it could be a free-for-all, like only 2 allowed in Hollis, say, which would mean that they would put out requests for proposal, and then you've got to start really showing your bona fides. And they can also restrict them to certain zones. So yeah, you can have a retail store, but it's going to be out in the industrial wasteland of, wherever. What next? So the state hires a consultant to write their regulations. That's when they take all that stuff that the lawmakers actually put together and they fine tune it. Probably some of it will be ignored, some of it will be tweaked where we don't even recognize it, but they're going to hire a consultant. That's going to be actually happening pretty soon. There's been some national consultants that put in initial inquiries so that for the request for information. So you're going to have like the Friedman Koskis of Colorado interested, BDS, those kind of places. So they've done this before. It should go rather quickly. Those rules will go out to a public hearing, so you'll know what they are. If you don't like them, I urge you to go to the public hearing and speak your mind, because they can be changed. And then those rules, however they get promulgated, go to the legislature for their approval. So next January, a new legislature with a new governor takes a look at the rules and makes sure that they're to their liking. DAFS has to staff all their adult use programming, which is going to be a lot of hiring. And then DAFS says that they will start accepting scoring licensing applications somewhere in mid-2019, assuming that, like, say, nobody appeals that contract for a consultant, that kind of stuff, or say the next governor doesn't like it and thinks of lots of ways that they can slow it down. This is something that just went up. I would urge anybody who's interested to make sure they go to the DAF's website. You can stay connected. So you can follow all of their meanderings and decide whether or not they're actually dragging their feet. And you can fill out a form. It does mean you need to identify yourself if you're really wigged out about that kind of thing. But if you are a vendor and potential applicant, that kind of thing, you can check off what your interest is, and they'll keep you informed, allegedly. So I would urge you to do that. That just went up. I have no idea if it's any good. That's it? Okay, everybody got their drink? So let's get to our panelists. So my first question is going to be a little bit so you guys can introduce yourself too, but can you just tell us a little bit about how you and your business fits into Maine's emerging adult use market? Basically, what can you do for them?
Oh. My name is Scott Durst, and I'm the owner of Durst Security Group. And I've been doing it now for about 4 years. Started out when I retired, was with Maine Drug Enforcement, as she said, for about 21 years after leaving Portland PD. And basically was looking for a security type job. And at the time, something was presented to me, Wellness, and I was able to meet with them, talk to them about their operation. They were looking for what I'd say was a professional security company to come in and do the job and do it correctly. So I basically began with them. We are all retired law enforcement and military veterans with security experience over the years. So we basically have come in looking for a safe way of conducting business, whether it's transportation of the currency, which is really a big issue at this point, because as you probably know, some of you in this room right now are taking cash, large amounts, from your business across town, across the state, and everybody else knows that as well. And we're also talking about the transportation of cannabis as well. So what we're trying to do, what my company is trying to do, is make this a professional way of helping you. And when we started with Wellness a while back, we've moved on to other companies right now, and trying to provide that same, I guess what I would say, secure way of doing it. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So after graduating from school, I was wondering what industry, what career I was looking to get into. And my father was a tax accountant down in Old Orchard Beach, and he had a couple clients that he dealt with the medical marijuana industry, and he said, this is really growing up in Maine right now. There is a huge need for compliance as these small businesses were growing. Obviously, this was in this industry's been done in the dark for a while, so now that it's been coming into the light, a lot of caregivers wanted to become compliant and legitimate. So we saw there was a need for someone to come in and help them with their startup and with their taxes to try and bring them into compliance. So we've helped them with anything from corporate structure to obtaining bank accounts and payroll, registering them and paying sales tax to get them compliant with the state. And then looking forward, especially with this adult use, the biggest part, again, is the municipalities is going out and educating the municipalities that they're currently doing business in, and trying to convince them that allowing them to switch over to adult use would be good for the municipality and help this bring some legitimacy to this industry. So right now we deal with mostly cultivators, extraction companies, edible makers, and potentially retailers as this develops.
Hi, I'm Erik Peters. I am the Chief Operating Officer of GHM Insurance up in Waterville. And I just want to draw kind of a quick distinction about what it is we do. We're an insurance agency. We're not an insurance carrier. So we help you get your insurance, the coverage you need at hopefully a better price. Those are our two goals. and it's a no additional cost. When you go through an insurance agency, whether it's GHM or one of the many other insurance agencies that are around in the state of Maine, you don't pay anything extra in your premium. We get paid a commission off your premium, but you're not paying anything extra. The insurance company just makes a little bit less. So it's a good idea to work with an insurance agent generally because they're a professional in the field who knows more about coverages than the average person would. And actually for the cannabis industry, it's essentially a necessity. And so the reason I say that is based on our experience with the medicinal cannabis business. I don't know how to put it other than insurance carriers don't really like to be in this space. Very few of them want to cover marijuana-related businesses. In fact, it's so bad that our current clients can't even work with insurers that are licensed to do business within the state of Maine. We have to go out to what's called the excess or surplus lines market, and those are carriers that aren't licensed to do business in Maine. However, the state lets them write policies for high-risk businesses or unusual businesses or businesses where there is no insurance market. So these excess surplus lines carriers that are pretty much the only game in town right now for medicinal cannabis, they won't deal with consumers, or in this case, businesses directly. You have to go through an agent and in turn a broker to get the coverage, period. Hopefully the insurance market will open up once the regulations concerning the adult use law pass. Even then, it's likely that due to the extensive regulatory scheme that will undoubtedly apply and the uniqueness of the industry, which Scott and Tom have already touched on some, the market is going to be tricky, and it's going to be something where you're going to want to be working with a professional to make sure that you have the right coverages that are protecting you at the right price. So I don't know if you guys could hear, but the question was, if you have insurance, I'm going to paraphrase you, will it cover you because of the federal illegality? And you would think so, wouldn't you? But there have been cases, none in Maine that I'm aware of, but nationally, where a company has been insured, has made a claim against its insurer, and the insurer has refused to provide coverage on the grounds that the contract was illegal and therefore void because of the federal illegality, which to me, there's a lot of ways I could describe that, not many of which I can say on this stage, but there have actually been some cases where courts have sided with insurers who have basically reneged on their duty to defend and cover insureds under the policies that they entered into in good faith. I'm not aware of any cases in the state of Maine where that's been an issue.
That's a great question that you asked. I think I'm going to ask actually folks to hold it till the end, though. I hope that if you have another one, though, that you'll come up, because that's a great question. I would have asked the same thing, and I've got to ask, to the insurance companies that reneged, do they repay the premiums?
They're happy to repay the premiums in those cases because the premiums are nothing compared to the claim.
Hi, my turn. So my name is Jacques Santucci with a company called Nucleus One. We're a business management consulting firm specializing in cannabis. And my background, I've always been in business management, financial management, starting companies in the past 20 years in Maine, been involved in a few business projects. And I started this journey in the cannabis industry 8 years ago when I started to work on the application, just like what we're talking about now, for Wellness Connection of Maine. And we started a company that's got now 4 of the 8 dispensaries in Maine. Wellness always had a business model where we thought that we needed to be the best at what we're doing to open the door to other people, to show that Maine was able to create opportunities in a new industry. And I think, looking at the room, I think we achieved that, and the state has been following what we were trying to do. But through that journey, we also had an experience in other states. So with my team, we've been involved in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, as far far as Hawaii, Florida, helping business owners or people who wanted to get into the cannabis industry to help them with the application or get their business up and running. So our role is start with designing the financial model, looking at all the resources that are going to be needed from staff to capital, and then start looking at the design of a facility, cultivation, extraction, or a dispensary, and then start the company looking at job description, hiring people, get employee number one, and then really work with my three colleagues here, with Scott on the security, with Tom on the tax part. Like Penny was saying, we also started a software company because one of the things I've seen was a lack of good tracking for plans, but also for cost. And because the industry is changing and the margins are getting smaller, it's essential to have a good accounting. So our role has been for the past 8 years helping people like you in the room to get to the next level and make it real.
So I'm going to ask a couple of follow-up questions to each one, which is, Scott, how dangerous is it to get into this line of work? I mean, you're the security guy. You obviously think that we need you. But how dangerous is it?
It seems to be over the years that, and I've traveled around the country here over the last couple of years, from California to Florida, and spoken to other, not only security companies but law enforcement, what they're going through and what they're seeing. And as this grows and is legitimized, there'll be less and less of that. Hopefully, because there'll be requirements within your security methods. And I think that the real danger right now is that the criminal element around the country is looking at this as a very soft target. I can just tell you that from looking at the state of Maine, and it's just not the state of Maine and how you operate. It's still done out of a car. It's a bag full of cash. You're taking it to whatever financial institution you can find, which are limited, or you're storing it, or you're caregivers and you're having a grow facility that's not secure, so to speak. The criminal element right now throughout this country is looking at this as an easier mark than going after the cocaine or the crack or pills, because it is a soft target. So what we're trying to do is making, as everyone here on this table, legitimizing it, as well as you out there, making this into a credible industry where you're doing the right things, you're putting security in place. And I will probably be a little bit more about the security part, but I think that's got to be one of the number one options that you're going to have to looking for when you're doing your when you're making this a project, because they're out there and they're looking at this as very easy. So it's how you transport, it's and who you're dealing with, and again, with my group, we one of the biggest things is the law enforcement liaison program, where we're working with local law enforcement, because coming from a background in drug enforcement, this was like, believe me, marijuana was not high in the priority, but it still was a illegal situation. So it was the last thing we wanted to deal with, but it was still a problem. So right now, it's law enforcement wants to get behind this. They want it legitimized. They want it done right. So what my experience is that when I meet with potential customers or clients is, okay, let's just agree on doing this the correct and right way. And that basically paves the way for everything else, insurance, and how you're going to put this together. I think this needs to be really a priority in your plan. And again, there are others like myself out there, and I just suggest that when you're looking at that you just find somebody that's reputable and professional and that has a good relationship with the community, especially the law enforcement community that you're going to be dealing with. But every day there is a situation around the country where the criminals are taking advantage of you and of this industry, because there's a lot of money. There's a lot of money that's sitting in somebody's, back room in a safe because they can't find a place to put it. And I think that's some of the biggest problems I'm seeing around the country is financial institutions need to come on board with this, because this is going to be a legit industry and has to be treated like that. So all of us have to kind of raise our expectations and professionalism and how it works so that banks will come on board with it.
Yeah, I want to add something to this too. I mean, Scott is right. The physical security and the system is very important, but I think it starts with you personally as what's your level for risk. And when I started in this 8 years ago, I had a business, and I had to ask myself, well, I'm at the fringe of the society. I'm very close to the border right there. You know, do I want to really be closer to the law? And you know, I checked and I talked to my lawyers, and we started there. And I think the security then start with you. What's your level and how far do you want to go? But then it goes also with your family, with your business partners, because they're going to be impacted. I mean, I have kids. You know, they're in high school, and you know, they see Patricia, who's my wife, on TV, and next thing you know, she's called the pot doctor at school. You know, it has an impact on your family. So you want to ask yourself about the security of your kids and your family and your business partners. Then the next level is employees. You know, if you're by yourself, it's one thing, but then when you start hiring people, then you know, they rely on you on paying the payroll, on keeping them safe with what Scott is saying, making sure you have the right insurance and the workers' comp. And so it goes on, and then the security then goes, and the safety goes with the product that you're putting out there. You know, it's one thing to grow, but you want to make sure that the product you're putting out there is good, and then you're not putting anybody in jeopardy. Because we are creating an industry, and I think the industry is relying on all of us to make it, you know, sustainable. And I think we need to continue to keep it safe.
And remember, too, there's no bankruptcy protection.
That's right.
Which is a big deal. That means that house, that business that you have can go down if your cannabis business fails. And then also, too, that on the security front, there are firearms prohibitions to anyone that uses, you know, you had the form that you have to fill out when you apply for a firearm, which means that your typical, I'm going to defend my land, my business, you know, with your right to bear arms, doesn't work here. So that's something else to consider.
Some states requires to have armed guard at dispensaries. I mean, in Maine we don't have it, but you know, some states really pushed it a lot further.
I was going to ask you about banks, actually, because he mentioned banks and how we need financial institutions. So when you have a client who comes in, Tom, are there banks that you can tell them, yeah, they're going to take your business and they're going to take your money?
Yeah, so I just have one point to add to the security piece. Another huge part of the security, since we're talking about the applications, is something that Wellness would attest to, is that's a huge piece of that application. If you're going for a scored application or if you're competing against other people, you want your security, everything with the security for that application to be on point, so you can score very high there. With the banking side, there's currently only one.
That's why you want to hire somebody like Scott.
Exactly.
Because, no, seriously, I mean, I've done application, you know, around the country. Having a professional is an extra point.
Yeah.
Maybe not you, some other people.
Hey, bring it out.
So trying to bring some legitimacy to this industry, one of the biggest steps was Seaport Credit Union coming on board now and accepting obviously cash from medical marijuana businesses, now allowing them to put that into the bank. So that not only affects just that business being able to pay taxes, but it also lends itself to other ancillary businesses like payroll, insurance. Actually having that money in the bank allows them now access to these ancillary businesses they probably wouldn't have had access to before. So we're hoping that a couple more banks come on board, because currently Seaport only deals with businesses in their jurisdiction. So right now there's a large portion of the state that doesn't have access to the banks, but that's hopefully another big piece that we'll see in the coming year.
And has Seaport said that they would be on board with adult use businesses as well?
Everything I've heard so far is that they will be accepting adult use businesses.
You know, what's interesting is when there's a business issue, people become creative. So there are technology that is coming out to help the industry. There's a company called CanPay that offers like a PayPal kind of a system for the cannabis industry. That's a lot of help because you have less cash. There's more systems that are coming in place. So by 2019, there'll be, you know, the Safe Harbor out of Colorado that's trying to make a push towards New England. So you're right, Seaport is and a couple of others are good start, and I'm hoping that in the next few months we're going to see other solutions.
That'd be great.
And Erik, I was going to ask you about a follow-up on your insurance questions, about what's the kind of insurance that the folks here in the audience would not know that they could actually get for their cannabis business? I mean,
so in a lot of ways, having a cannabis-related business is similar to any other kind of business in terms of the coverages you need. Things like general liability coverage. If someone slips, somebody's in your store, in your property, they slip and fall, you have coverage for that. If you have a car, auto liability. And also for even though it's cannabis, you're making a product and you're disseminating a product out into the marketplace. So you need things like product recall and products coverage, which, you know, someone gets sick from using your product, or it's contaminated or something like that. Another one is workers' comp. Anytime you have an employee, you hire your first employee in Maine, you need to have workers' comp coverage. That's the law. Doesn't matter whether you're a cannabis-related business, doesn't matter whether you're a brewery, doesn't matter whether you're a nightclub. So there's a lot of similarities. And one of the big ones for cannabis is what's called equipment breakdown. And that's what covers you if some of your machines suddenly break down. It doesn't cover wear and tear, but if the machine suddenly breaks down or there's something that causes it to break down, there's coverage. And I'll give you an example. GHM, where I work, we play pretty heavily in the craft breweries space. We insure about 200 breweries around the country. And one of the big coverages for them is this equipment breakdown, because like the cannabis industry, like most aspects of the cannabis industry, craft beer is very capital intensive. So if something happens to your fermenter or one of your barrels and a batch goes bad, you're covered to fix the equipment itself as well as the resulting losses. So that's something you need when you're in the cannabis industry, when you've invested in a lot of capital intensive machinery. Unfortunately, as I was telling some of the panelists before we got started, the market for that, for the cannabis-related businesses, has dried up. There's no coverage for that currently, right now. So we're working with some brokers and some of these surplus lines carriers to see if we can find a replacement for that. And we're hoping to work with a company called Next Wave to get that product out to the market, hopefully by the summer, but it doesn't currently exist. To kind of circle back around to what we were talking about in terms of crime and crime coverage, that's a very real coverage that any business can have, but that's particularly important in this industry for the reasons that we've been discussing. There's still a lot of cash, and there's still a lot of product that you can move on the streets. So that not only is that coverage available, in order for you to have for you to get basic coverage with almost any carrier that's willing to write it, a big part of the application pertains to what you've got in terms of security controls. What kind of safe do you have? If it's not bolted to the floor, it needs to be a certain weight. If it is bolted to the floor, it can be a little bit less. You have to have cameras. You have to have a central alarm system. You have to have a buzz-in system. You have to have daily records of your product. It's a very record-keeping intensive, safety-intensive business in a way that a lot of other industries are not. So it's just, kind of reinforces everything that these guys have been saying about the safety nature business, and back to the point that I made earlier about this is a difficult industry to be insured in.
I want to actually, something he told me when we were talking, when I was suckering him into doing this, was that that kind of made my jaw drop, which is the idea that you want to eventually get a policy, whatnot, but it's talking with him or with someone like him before you actually do your facility or your store is, think about the money that you would save if you knew to get this kind of a safe, instead of that kind, and how much cheaper your coverage is going to be if you have this instead of that. It's much easier to do that from the start than it is to do it after, like, you've got your building, you're ready to go, and think, I'm going to go get some insurance, and then find out, wow, did I make some bad choices or some expensive choices? So.
Yeah, and that's a great point, because all those figures that I just rattled off about the controls that you need, that affects the layout and the design of your facility. And one of the things that Jacques just mentioned to me that I would be remiss if I didn't bring up, and this kind of falls back under the heading of cannabis-related businesses are just like any other. We insure commercial entities of all sizes and in all industries. And there's a coverage under your general commercial business insurance, you're not covered for things like sexual harassment claims, racial discrimination claims, religious discrimination claims, basically anything related to the hiring and termination process. So a huge product that we've seen, a product that we've seen a huge spike for is called EPLI, Employment Practices Liability Insurance. Just like any other business, once you get to a certain level, and I'm sure your business is at that level, that's definitely going to be something you're going to want to invest in. As Penny said when she was introducing me, I used to be an employment attorney, employment law attorney, and I defended a lot of companies and individuals in front of the Maine Human Rights Commission and the EEOC down in Boston. And it's a pain in the butt no matter what, but if you're having to pay a lawyer out of your own pocket instead of the insurance company paying them, believe me, it's even worse.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
So just real quick on that as well is one of the real problems right now, and has been for a number of years, and is the transportation of the product, the pickup of currency, which is more and more all the time. And in my case, I have to be insured, and it was with Lloyd's of London. It was the only one that would touch me at the time. Which they have now gotten out of the business. So it's now trying to find insurance companies that will insure a company like myself or my men and women in my group who is going to be traveling around the state with a lot of money, or if it's product, if it's cannabis or products of it. Those are real issues right now, as we're talking about right here, that the insurance industry is really reluctant to do that. So that's what you have to look at. In this state and in other states that I've been, the owners are basically putting, again, a bag full of cash in their car and driving it to the bank. Can you afford to lose $50,000, $100,000, or $20,000? Can you, if one of their vehicles gets hijacked, this is what the criminal element is looking at right now, can you afford to do that? So it's us to try to get insured, and that's, I guarantee you, that is going to be one of the biggest hurdles that you're going to have to do getting into this industry at this time. It's there, but again, it's something that you have to have.
Yeah, I mean, who knew I had a potential customer sitting with me up here on the panel? I figured there's a room, of course, but yeah, just one quick anecdote to build on that. We represent a caregiver who's got a very professional operation, and we were out, one of my salespeople and I, visiting his facility and talking with him, and he said to us, hey, I really like doing business with you guys. Do you think you could take over my homeowner, my auto coverage? And we're having a really hard time just finding homeowner and auto, not commercial auto, not anything related to his car in the scope of his business. We're having problems finding a market for him in these personal insurance needs, basically because of his profession. So it's a really, really tight and difficult market right now.
So all that stuff sounds expensive. So I'm going to actually put Jacques on the spot here. So if I'm out there, I'm listening to these different things, and I'm hearing dollar signs. So you've got a customer comes to meet you for the first time, or client, and they want to get into it. Is there a certain amount of money that these folks need to have? Like, don't even talk to me if you don't have this much. Not that you'd be that rude. Yeah. I'm sure you'd be more polite than I am, but.
Yes. Well, yeah, I try to be polite. But it's more of the opposite, because everybody sees a different size of business that they want. So, a small operation, like one of those small licenses, is not the same price than over 20,000 square feet. But I've seen people coming to me saying, I've got $50,000, I maybe have another 50 in the 401k, and I want to do something. And my answer is, you don't want to do this, because it's not enough. And just by getting the right people, the right insurance, the right tools, the right security, even just for the application, it's not going to be enough. And there's a little bit of a myth about, I can start a cannabis business, be successful, and out of $100 grand make $1 million. I don't know what you guys think, but I don't think it's realistic. I think you're putting yourself in jeopardy. So I think the industry is changing rapidly. Maybe 4 or 5 years ago, actually 10 years ago in California, that was probably the case, but they were not playing by the rules. I think here the state is telling us you have to play by the rules, and playing by the rules involves, a lot of cost. Real estate, insurance, accountants, lawyers, hiring people, and so it can be expensive. Again, depends on the size of what you want to do.
Is there a place for someone who does have that kind of capital you were just talking about, like to say, join up with other folks that, to...
Yes. Yeah, I think that the industry is changing a lot, and it's getting more, the entry ticket is more and more expensive. The prices, I'm involved in a project in Massachusetts, and the quotes that the first budget we put together based on numbers that we have, real numbers from a year and a half ago, is just been blown out of the park by 3 times because everything is getting expensive. Or we're talking about that with Scott earlier. Every vendors, every contractors, everybody is kind of taking their share of the profit before you guys are even in business. And because everybody's super busy right now, the economy is doing good. It's even difficult to find people to work with and get the project up and running. That said, it's the industry is changing, and there's going to be less and less of a room for a small business, like a tiny niche market, except for people who have something very specific, either a specific strain that they want to sell to a bigger entity. But I think most of the businesses are going to have to be ready to grow to a level that it's sustainable. Otherwise, with the number of licenses, the number of players we're talking about in the state of Maine, the competition is going to be such that the price is probably going to come down, and then it's going to be difficult to survive.
Now, what about the limitation on the financing, having it be Maine sourced, at least half of it Maine sourced through 2022, I think. Yeah. So does that keep things viable for people here now at a smaller scale?
Yeah. So for business people who want to get in the industry, and I don't think it's going to be that much of an issue if they want to be at a small scale. The 7,000 square feet kind of scale, I think the 51% is not going to be a problem. But anybody who wants to be at a larger scale, that means you got to have a lot more requirement, real estate, the air conditioning, all those things, and quickly you're in a budget in millions. So sure, there's wealthy individuals in Maine, no doubt about it. But there's also a lot of capital available in the country for the industry. So it's going to be a little bit tricky to bring them here. And I think that's where the state of Maine missed, maybe I'm jumping here, but I think the state of Maine missed something 3-4 years ago by not adopting some of the bills that were going through. Because 3-4 years ago, we could have attracted a lot of capital in Maine and created a lot of jobs and created a lot of businesses and then be a leader in the country. Well, instead of that, I think the state kind of slowed down things and for a lot of reasons. And now, the doors are closing because the capital went somewhere else, and it's going to be more and more difficult to show that we are unique. When you see the amount of capital that's being injected in Massachusetts and Connecticut and Rhode Island, it's insane. You've probably seen it in the paper. There's some people who have barely a license, and they're selling it for $17, $18 million, and they have nothing. So now to try to attract it to Maine, it's going to be more difficult. 4 years ago, everybody would have run to us and say, I want to give you money.
So I'm going to jump into another question, which is imagine that these are potential customers who sit down with you. What things in your specialty area did they need to line up before they even apply? What are the top 3 things that they've got to take care of in security? Let's just go down the line. And I'm going to ask you to kind of keep it a little brief so we can get to some of the other questions.
I think what I've seen over the last 3 or 4 years in the security end of it is just coming to realization that you need security. And it can't be just, somebody that you have a friend that, has a firearm and that can sit in the shop or whatever, or you can drive to one place or another. It has to be organized. It has to be, I think, as you're going to be interfacing with local law enforcement, and I'm not just blowing my horn because of coming from it, but you're going to want qualified security people who have been involved in this industry, that has the relationship with local and state, because that's the individuals, those are the officers that are going to be confronting you or coming to a facility for what reason or another. Putting that relationship together, just being informed, and again, that's kind of like we do as well. We have a law enforcement liaison program. We do that with the city, with the town officials, get everybody on board so that they're all kind of understanding that, hey, if you're going to do this, here's some of the risks, here's some of the dangers, and here's what you need to do to make this a legit business. That's what's going to separate the legit from the not legit, from the people out there who aren't doing it right, people who are doing it right, and that's where you're going to see, I think, the banking industry and every other industry being more appreciative and more approachable to doing that. So I'm thinking basically is just that have professional people, whether it's the banking, law, the security part, the financing, is what's going to separate those who are really serious about doing this and people who aren't. So again, there's going to be plenty of people who are going to get into this business, and I've seen it all over the country. And there's some really good ones and there's some really bad ones. Just do your homework.
So for my clients looking to potentially get into adult use, some of the key takeaways, the first one would be having a sound business plan with a realistic forecast of the financials going into this. So making sure that they know who they're working with, making sure they have their employers in place, they have their market where they know they can sell their products, and also do they have the capital to make sure they can actually run and operate this if it doesn't go to plan. The second would be, have you talked to your municipality? What's going on with that municipality? Where are they in the process? Do they have a moratorium, a prohibition? Have you met with any of the planning department? Have you met with the town manager? Have you discussed where you're going to be actually operating? I think that's one of the key points. And then also your compliance and up to date with all the tax agencies. So because they're requiring you to have 4 years of your Maine state returns, I think it's a huge piece to make sure that you've paid all your taxes as a medical marijuana business in preparation of this switch. So hopefully you have your foot in the door as this switch is over. So I think tax compliance is huge.
So assuming the adult use insurance market is similar to the medicinal cannabis market, you're going to need to have everything that these guys have talked about before you're able to get insurance. I mean, one of the questions currently on the applications that we commonly use is, are your licenses in good standing? Meaning you have to have your licenses already. So everything that Tom and that Scott has said, you're going to need that to get your license, which if things hold the way that they have, you're going to need to get your insurance. The big takeaways that you're also going to need in order to successfully navigate the insurance world are just bookkeeping type things. What are your estimated sales going to be? Your inventory, your crop information, including the values. You're going to have to be prepared to show how you're going to keep daily records of products that are on site and sold, the date, the type, how much it's sold. I mean, you go through this kind of stuff on a regular basis, I'm sure. So it's really ticky-tack. It's really labor intensive in order to get insurance. But and insurance, who knows how the final regulations are going to play out, whether insurance will be a legal requirement or not. Even if it's not, frankly, to get a lease and to get bank loans, generally speaking, you're going to have evidence of insurance. So even if it's not legally required, frankly, it's probably practically going to be.
Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat what my colleague said because that's all good points. I would summarize it by saying that the adult use is bringing competition to the market. So if you want to be successful, you're going to have to make a difference. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to stay in business. And to be different, you need to be realistic. That's what I say to all my clients. that we help on business consulting, you need to have a realistic business plan, and you have to be realistic with who you are, what you want to do, and stay focused. So there's a lot of opportunities, but just like any businesses, find your niche, stay focused, and be realistic. And also be realistic about the capital that you need and all the systems and all the tools. But also very important is the management team. Make sure that you're not by yourself. We're talking about a complex, very intense business. And so you need a management team. You need to have good vendors around you, and that's also very important part of your business plan.
Now I'm going to start that on your end, so this time you get
Okay.
first crack. But what is the biggest mistake that you're going to see in people's applications?
I think the biggest mistake. So I've done a lot of applications around the country. For either some of our projects or some clients. And so every rules are different, but the number one thing that I've seen in application that are not successful is underestimating the resources that you need for the application. Do not underestimate the number of staff. Do not underestimate the requirement of electricity. Do not underestimate anything, because it's a real business, and the people who are reviewing those applications, they know exactly what they're looking for. So I've seen applications where they say, oh, we're only going to have a couple of people in our dispensary with 3 point of sale system open Monday to Saturday. Well, there's no way you can do it with 2 people, because 8 people work only 8 hours a day, and Monday to Saturday it's more than 2 people. So all those things that you don't underestimate the human resources need, and there's the need for professionals. And then the other things is don't underestimate. I think we said it several times. The capital needs. I think states are expecting that how much capital expenditure or upfront capital you're going to need to produce the inventory, to open the store, to start paying people. So don't underestimate the upfront cost.
So as I said, you're going to have be licensed in order to get insurance. There's just no way around that. The big thing that we've seen in the medical cannabis area that trips people up in terms of getting insurance is, we get it. Insurance is a pain in the ass, and I understand that. But even from that perspective and that world, the application is significantly difficult to do. And I can't tell you how many times where I'll talk to one of my salespeople, and oh yeah, I've got a really good prospect. It seems really sound. I sent him the Next Wave application, warned him about what it was, and I told him I'd work with him, and we never hear from him again, because it's a difficult, time-intensive thing, and I don't want to figure out, what the value of my products are, and I can't tell you that, and I've got other stuff to do. I get it. I totally get it. It's a difficult process to go through, but if you want to have insurance, which is essentially a prerequisite to doing business, you have to recognize that you need to jump through those hoops. And so we see a lot of people just frankly give up on the process, which delays their getting it, or which obviously they're not going to get insurance, or it takes them forever and a day, and they're putting themselves, their business, and every other thing that we've been talking about here at risk because they're not insured during that period.
One of the biggest mistakes I've seen in other states, and it also ties back to resources, but when you are limited on what you can spend for your project, if you invest in a facility or you invest in a retail space in a town that most likely will not opt in now that that's a requirement, you're really throwing capital at something that really won't pay off within the near future. So I think it's really being smart about your capital, putting it into cities that will accept you in there so you can get going as quick as you can. So I think it's really doing your due diligence with these municipalities to make sure that you are welcome there and that you're educating them on what's going on.
I think on the security side, it in the past, and not with everyone, has been down here. Up here is, the business end of it, making money, taking care of this, and security ends up finding the down here. And that's not with all. But I will just tell you is that in my experience around not only Maine but around the country, that's where it ends up. Where now, because insurance is really driving that and it should be, your protection of your employees and you should be here, and then, you work your way down to, well, what do I need to make that happen? You can't afford to lose a life or somebody injured because you didn't take the steps. And again, they're not all that expensive to make sure that these are all in place, and that includes what you do, the security systems that you put together, the people that you hire, what's your priority when it comes to security, and then it's the transportation, whether you're transporting the product or it's the cash. And until those things, are addressed, whether it's federally or not, you're pretty much on your own to make those decisions. So my priority is the people that are working in the dispensaries and the grow facilities and all that, caregivers, whatever. That's where you as the caregiver or the potential business owner, whatever, that's the priority, and how do you achieve that? And it's about looking at who's going to do that, what's their previous history, what is their experience, and making those decisions. So it's you get what you pay for, but again, the most important is the people that are working with you, and then you work your way down.
I want to add something following what Tom just said about the towns. So I forgot about that part, but we're going to have to convince those towns that they want to welcome a business. And one thing that I've noticed is that nobody likes changes, nobody likes unknown. So for the town, they're taking a risk, and you have to mitigate that risk for them, because they want to make sure that the people they're going to welcome in that industry in their town are the people who are going to make them proud. And so don't think that they understand what you're talking about. Don't think they understand what Penny showed you on the screen. They have no idea. They just heard about it, and they make up their own story. So you have to educate them about what you're trying to do, but also what the law is allowing them to do. So then they feel like they're in good hands with somebody who's going to represent their interest best. I think that's also something to keep in mind.
So I have a million more questions, and anybody that I've interviewed knows that I could spend hours, stalking you and asking you every one of them, but we're going to turn it over to audience questions now. So if you have a question...
if you start giving us beer, we can stay here all night.
My babysitter might not like that, but yeah. If you have a question, so please, there's a mic right up here in front. You come up and ask. Feel free to line up so that everybody gets a shot. I'm going to remind you to keep it to one question. Somebody else will ask the question that you're just dying to ask, that number 2 question. And I'm asking if it can be a question and not a comment or a story. If you've got a story to tell, please find me afterwards. We'll write you up real big. But for our purposes here tonight, let's keep it to a couple sentences max, because we've got a lot of people here. So go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I read recently this week that the state of Oregon has kind of destroyed the market for marijuana because they've glutted the market. So you've got all these people who've gone through all this investment that you guys are all talking about, and the market is tanked. Can you speak to what Maine has done and tell us whether or not there's a risk we'll run into that same market problem?
Well, I think I can start with this. You're absolutely correct. They're killing the market. So one of the reasons it's such a nice bubble is that the prices are pretty high. Obviously there's no real standards, but let's say probably in New England you're around $250 to $300 an ounce for marijuana. Well, in Oregon, I think they're down to $90. Colorado is down to $120. There's companies like BDS Analytics that are tracking the market, and they're giving us a lot of data on this. So they are killing it, and there is no doubt that it's going to become a commodity in the next. I think with the Trump administration, I think we stay safe. They're not going to legalize it nationally, but who knows what's going to happen after that? In 5-10 years, it's going to become a commodity. The prices are going to come down, and it's going to become just like a coffee shop, right? And the difference is going to be with the quality of the coffee, if you see what I'm saying, and the experience you have when you go to the stores. And that's why we started our software company, because I see that every business is going to need to know exactly what their margins are so they can react very quickly at pricing that are changing.
And fortunately, I think we see the good and bad of capital investment with the price glut down in Oregon. there really was no cap on how much could be grown in Oregon, so we saw just a race to the bottom. I think with the excise tax that they've placed on marijuana here in Maine for the adult use, I think it's set at somewhere around $330. It's going to be very hard to compete for a race to the bottom when they have that excise tax when you're selling wholesale. So hopefully that's something the state has done to somewhat keep everything more boutique and higher end and not have it be a race to that bottom price.
And then that brings up the question of when it is legal everywhere in surrounding states. Even if Maine is doing its job and doing what Tom just said, you have the possibility of getting undercut by any one of our neighbors. So that's yet another stomach churning consideration to think of if you're thinking about getting into this business.
Go ahead.
Concerning manufacturing of edibles and tinctures, is it, I'm not sure of the law, but can you outsource product, or are you responsible for making the facility to make the tincture or the edibles?
Are you talking about medical or adult use?
Either at this point.
So in medical, like wellness and a lot of the caregivers, you have to be vertically integrated where you produce everything that you sell. And the adult use, you at least will be allowed to be a niche in that industry. If you just want to do extractions or edibles, you can only do that and then sell it to another store if you want to. But currently, as wellness knows, you have to produce everything you sell.
And it's a trend that you see in the country. The states, every state who became involved in the industry had a little bit of time to catch up, but it's becoming a trend where they're realizing that the vertically integrated, where you need so many skills, right, from a grower, extractor to retail, those are different trades. So now they're starting to kind of separate all things, and so you would have to build your own facility. That means you're probably going to have to buy trim or something like this from somebody else, then extract it, do your own product, test it, and then sell it to a retailer.
But with the adult market, you're saying you're going to be able to do the manufacturing facilities. Are they accepting outsourcing?
Well, I think we're waiting for the rulemaking to see how they're going to do it.
Yeah.
That's the little bit of the unknown.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Tony Kiefer. I'm from Arch Solar. We develop energy-efficient hybrid greenhouses, and we make them available for lease.
Hi, Tony.
Here in Maine, there's a very tight real estate market, and the cost of capital is really high. And many companies are rushing to this to build out facilities. On the topic of how to finance this and to do either buy and build out versus lease, do you have considerations from a strategic perspective or from an accounting perspective on the best way for folks that are thinking of developing facilities, how they can go about that problem?
So first, I heard that a lot of people are already building their facilities and things like this. I mean, it's a risk, right, to start building when you don't have the rules in place and things like this. As far as buying versus leasing, the problem of buying is access to capital, right? So unless you have partners that can either own the building or can buy the building, it's difficult. So most of the time you don't have a choice. You have to lease the building, and that's what most people do. You lease the building and then you pay for the capital and the improvements. I've heard some people that let their landlord pay for the improvements and then they really pay a higher lease. Really what's happening is the landlord is taking your margin and then you become an employee indirectly from the landlord, but I understand also why it happens. I'm hoping that the solution that you bring to the market is also going to make it more affordable for people to start growing with greenhouses and other alternative solutions that are less capital intense.
So from a tax perspective, currently because marijuana is still federally controlled substance, you're only allowed certain, or you're not allowed any deductions, but you're allowed certain adjustments to your income. So I think that would be a key factor in are you bringing in income in the beginning, or is this going to be a long process on whether you lease versus buying? So if you can adjust everything to the cost of goods sold and you're making a lot in the beginning, you might want to look at putting most of that purchase price up front. If it's going to take a longer build out, you might want to look at leasing.
Hi, I'm Chris Mashad, CEO of Be Green Supplies. So we're a provider of software and hardware solutions to support different elements of the business, from cultivation, processing, and retail. So you were asking about the biggest mistakes seen in the industry. One that we've seen on a national level that I wanted to ask Jacques about actually is track and traceability of articles through the space between plant product and phase change, and how the brands coexist throughout a transition of medical into recreational. So as these brands become bigger and faster and they can sell their product to multiple entities, what is Maine looking at for trace and trackability outside of standard POS systems?
Well, did you get that?
I'm not sure I got it. Do it again.
So the basic on that is trace and trackability of, let's say, example, your flour going into oil and the steps in between. So standard POS systems such as Ease, Leaf Logics, etc. They cover the very basic things, and then the inventory management that supports that is not necessarily traced the same in every state.
Yes.
So like you have barcoding in one, RFID in another, and a blend. And then the question is more around the difference between medical and recreational and limiting the problems.
Okay, got it. Yeah, to me, it's the same thing. It's a business. I don't see cannabis being different than any other manufacturing business. You need to track every part of what you're doing. I mean, the people who manufactured this, they were tracking the plastic, the water, the cap, and everything. So for cannabis, it's the same thing. On top of that, you have the compliance, because the states usually wants to track how many plants. So recreational adult use, to me, it's not about what the state is requiring, it's best practices. And if you want to be successful, you have to have best practices. So a lot of the software that are on the market, they're only tracking units, and most of them, they're actually tracking units by the harvest, but not really by the plant. I think the way to go is, either barcodes or RFID. RFID are a little bit more expensive, but tracking by the plant, so then you know exactly your cost, you know exactly where that plant is. It goes with the security, it also goes with the safety for the patients. So to me, adult use or medical doesn't make any difference. It's about best practices.
Right. All right, thanks.
But you had a good question. Where you lost me was with the brand.
Yeah.
And that's the piece I didn't understand, because there are some national brands that are trying to come up with some products, and I think that's where you were going.
Yeah.
And so there are national brands that are so if you think about this, few people are doing this for anything else than money, and branding or brands have a high value. So you start seeing brands coming at the national level, like Dixie is pretty big in the West Coast. You've got. What? That's what I said. I met some people that are not doing it for money, but that's what I said. I think most people are doing it for money, but
co-benefit.
Yes, yeah, but I think there's still some activists, big time activists out there. But yes, so for money, but so for the branding. They have an issue, because in Maine, we talked about it, they're going to have to produce the product here, and the brand is coming, and so that means you have to white label product and put a brand on it. So that piece, I think the state haven't really figured that out, and but to me, it's still about best practices.
Right. So we're working on that solution to say. Let's say you're a multi-state operator, and you have
I'm actually going to jump in, because you've got
sorry.
a couple people behind you. I suggest you all get together afterwards and talk up a storm, though. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but some of those folks have been waiting. So.
Okay, I'll try to be fast.
No,
Excuse me. That's okay. Thomas, you have said if you're wanting to get in this industry, opening up a retail store, you should start the discussion with the towns, the planning board. The problem I'm encountering is many of these towns and cities are putting a moratorium because they are afraid. The bill has been passed, however, the rules have not come out. So, I agree with Jacques, you have to educate, but still the bottom line, it's the rules have not come out. Now, since the bill has been passed there, I think this is what I'm asking any of you, the state, I think it's the Office of Administrative and Financial Services is supposed to hire a consultant and a committee. So what I'd like to know, who is on this committee and how many of them are really people that are already in the industry who are actually going to come up with these rules? Does anyone know? Is it only one person, two?
I believe DAFs will be, I think it's a 14-member committee where 12 of them are appointed from the department, and then 2 of them are from the industry. So I think one from, I think the caregiver side and potentially one from the dispensary side. But I know out of this committee, unlike Massachusetts where they had more industry input, it's going to be mostly from the government, unfortunately.
Right. Is there anything we can do to call? I'm just saying to get more people.
You will
from
have
the
your
industry.
chance though during the public hearing process. You know,
Okay.
once these rules are initially proposed, they will come out for hearings. They're kind of dry. There's never a guarantee that they're going to listen to you. Sometimes they just sit up there and nod. But you are able to submit written comments, testify about that, and supposedly they take those into account.
We'll see.
And talk to your rep and talk to your state senator.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Hi, I'm looking for clarification on 51% capital raised for my company in recreational. If I have multiple entities conjoining, or if I was a license holder of one of the dispensaries here, are they looking at how we got started or the actual capital to start our businesses? And more importantly, if we already have a business in place to cross over from recreational to medical to recreational, you know, how do you identify that capital to start?
I don't know how they're going to do it because, you know, it's all about rulemaking. But what I've seen in other states, they actually ask for bank statements with names of people and things like this. So in this case, I would not be surprised that they say, you know, if you got Billy and Joey or putting the money, they're going to ask for bank statements for the past couple of years from both of them, see where the money is coming from.
In the assets of the company, I guess my question is, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Actually, if it's an entity, though, that's something that they talked about at the committee and specifically said they were going to leave it up to the rulemaking to decide. Like, if you had a medical, marijuana company or operation that was then moving over, like whether they would be looking to see who it was that was owning, your medical business, how you came up with that cash. And before, so they haven't.
So they will look into that. It will
they
be
said,
like your assets
this is complicated. Let's leave it to rulemaking.
That'd be cool. All right.
I think that's one of the biggest ways I think that we'll see out-of-state capital coming in that isn't necessarily tied to the entity. Is a lot of the capital for cultivation. So say you're buying the building, you're buying all the equipment, that doesn't technically have to be held under that entity. So that's a way for, I think, a lot of capital to come in that the state really can't do anything about that. If it's just leased to the entity, you might not have to hold the 49%, but those out-of-state investors still have a grip on your company.
So it's more looking at shareholders or stakeholders. In
Exactly. So how is it structured, and what's the entity looking like?
Cool. Thank you.
I think we're all going to become very creative, and in every state, that's what happened. You look at the rules, and then you're like, okay, how are we going to make it work?
Hi, my name is Amaris. I'm from Legal Leaf LLC, and we just opened up in Wyndham, and for the most part, we're grow supplies and purveyors, but we offer a lot of sort of side services or support services. We aren't directly growing, but one of the things we're looking into is we have a lot of experience in regards to compliancy with labeling, and we're really curious what's going to be the big difference, if there is any yet, in regards to how medical providers, caregivers have to label their products, which is relatively, not necessarily simple right now, but it's not like a big deal compared to, say, something with like the adult users. Is there any difference known so far yet? Anybody have any opinions on it?
Well, so I don't know. Again, I think it's going to be in the rulemaking, but I'm a big proponent of good labeling because, when I buy a yogurt, I want to know what the date is on the lid, right? I think it's the same thing for these products. It's even more important. We owe it to our client to tell them this is when that thing was made, this is what's in there, and this is what you can expect. And again, we are creating an industry, so the sooner we have standards, the better. So I know it's painful. Believe me, I know it's painful and it's expensive, but I don't think there's any shortcut. I don't see why there should be any shortcut. So labeling, and I'm sure you're going to buy insurance.
Yeah, it's just from a risk management and insurance standpoint, you're going to want to, regardless of what the law requires you to do, you're going to want to err on the side of disclosure because, as I think I mentioned earlier, talking about a product's liability context, you're in some sense you're no different than somebody who, sells steaks, supplies steaks to Hannaford. If you sell bad meat to Hannaford and somebody gets sick by it, they're going to be looking for you. If you sell a bad product, contaminated, or if it's unclearly labeled. I mean, I know, and I'm sure you know a lot about this, that one of the big issues with edibles is people didn't know what they were getting. So, you're not going to, it's not like you're going to be selling to a bunch of chemists, but the more clearly you can label things and let people know what they're buying, the better off you're going to be from a risk management standpoint.
Okay. I would urge you to actually check out the section of the new law that's specifically about labeling and advertising. I killed the slide because there were, let's face it, there were too many, but there is a lot of labeling and advertising requirements already put into the law. They'll only get longer when it comes to rulemaking, but unlike medical where they, at this point, the only thing they could really get you for on medical is if you claimed something that wasn't true.
Yeah.
But with the adult use, there's a lot, like you can't have animal shapes, like no lobster edibles, that kind of stuff, because it's kid friendly. It's going to be, there are a lot of things that are meant to stop kid-friendly advertising or recruiting children and that kind of thing. And then there's also, you have to have a batch number on everything. You've got to have, it's milligrams per serving, THC, CBD, that kind of stuff. So there are a lot that are already in there and that will only get longer. I can shoot you the slide if you're really dying for it, but I will tell you that it's right up there, already laid out in the law that was just passed. So
Okay.
at least to get started.
Try not to add too much of a follow-up, but does anybody have any opinions on sort of making sure that the label is in regards to having maybe some testing done? Is there a lot of support for growers to have testing done before to make sure that their label is correct? Is there any...
There's a whole section about testing. Right?
Okay.
So it's mandatory testing, unlike for medical where there's no mandatory testing, but a lot of medical folks do it because it's a purchase influencer, right? Yep. If you can say this is what the terpene, profile is like or whatever. But for adult use, it's mandatory testing and, it'll get more fleshed out during rulemaking, but there's a long list of what's going to be required there. So I definitely, I'm sure no one's getting into this without, somebody looking their stuff over, but a lot of that's already going to be laid out in the law for you if you want to go check it out.
All right. Thank you very much.
Hello. I'm here from Colorado. I've been working in the cultivation side for the last 3 years. I've been out there, and I've seen a lot of changes even in the last 3 years. And I was wondering, once everything's put into place, all the rules, the regulations, the laws, are each city and town going to have a certain amount of time to make decisions on if they're going to allow cultivation, if they're going to allow a dispensary? Is there going to be a certain cutoff date or anything like that?
So that's where one of the biggest changes from the Citizens Initiative to what's currently in place was it was opt-out, which means they have to make a decision, where now it's opt-in. So now if they just sit on these decisions, you can't operate in that town. So I don't know. It's going to be a very long process because it is extremely hard to educate, not necessarily out of fault of the municipality, but it is pretty confusing at the state level. So I think we're going to see a decent amount of time until these municipalities are comfortable enough to opt in and know exactly where they want to put these.
Yeah, I know. I live in Freeport, and I can tell you there and in all of the surrounding towns, there are moratoriums. And so it's, we had a question, and there was some talk earlier about, not wasting time on municipalities that are a strong no. If there's somewhere that you're interested in that hasn't already opted in, you're going to want to start laying the groundwork and going to town meetings and talking to town councilors about that. Just, if there's a spot that you really, really want to be in business, besides, Portland and South Portland, I think are the big two so far, at least down here.
And why is that there's only one dispensary here in Portland?
Well, because that was the rules back 8 years ago, and going back to what I said earlier, I think the state missed something. They should have opened more than 8. I mean, we should have 20 or 30 or 40. There's room for everything. But at the time, it was 1 per DHHS county. So 1 in York, 1 in Cumberland. It was like by population. So they came up with just 8.
So they can't go back and, they can change it at this point, though, if they want.
I like it if they don't change it. But no, but I think, seriously, and I know some people might not believe that, but Wellness has been lobbying to open more dispensaries because, Wellness cannot, for example, is got one on Congress Street, and somebody who lives in Windham, it's half-hour drive. So, we owe it to the patient to come to them, right? So having one down the street, no, it's probably not that cool, but having one in Windham, why not? Because, people are living there, and that's what we should have done. So the state didn't do it. There's only 8, and I think the new rules are just going to change that completely. Because I think the medical program is going to fade away in the next 3 or 4 years in Maine, just like it's happening in almost around the country.
Yeah, Colorado was overkill. There was like 800.
I'm gonna shut you down. I'm sorry, but we have the gentleman behind you is our last question because we have the space till 7. So your last question, and then we're gonna wrap up.
Okay. My name is Matt Lano from Patriot Energy Group. I actually work with caregivers across the state of Maine to help manage their energy spend. So if anyone wants to talk about any savings on electricity, please feel free. But my question is directed to Tom on the tax-exempt privileges. I know there's, I've been noticing that I've tried to advise them on the manufacturing compared to state sales tax. And I just wanted to have some more clarity on that to what they might be entitled to. I heard there's some sort of a credit or reimbursement that I'm trying to help add value to some of my clients.
So the state has, since they clarified that you have to pay sales tax, they also said that you are entitled to become a commercial agricultural producer. So once you show a tax return to the state that shows you as a commercial agricultural producer, you're then entitled to bring that certificate to CMP to not pay sales tax on your electricity. Okay. So that's one of the give and take of you have to pay sales tax obviously with your clients when you sell to them, but you're also saving it on one of your biggest expenses, which is electricity.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So that's a wrap, guys. A big thank you to our guests, Scott Durst, Tom Mourmouras, Erik Peters, and Jacques Santucci. And thank you all so much for attending tonight. Our next Maine Cannabis Report Live event's going to be this fall. The best way to find out the topic and the date as soon as we announce it is to subscribe to the newsletter. Visit thepressherald.com and you can sign up there. Thanks a lot. Have a good night.